The Krell battle fleet emerged from quantum slit space like a metallic plague, their obsidian black dreadnoughts casting planet-sized shadows across the Sol system. Supreme Commander Voxtar's tactical displays showed a perfect, mathematically precise invasion formation, the same strategy that had crushed 100 civilizations. They were wrong. Lieutenant James Reyes, or what James Reyes had become, stood at the core of humanity's first adaptive fleet. No longer simply a human, he was a living computational node of the adaptive response protocol, his consciousness distributed across multiple quantum-linked platforms. Incoming, he said. The word was both spoken and transmitted across 1 million computational channels simultaneously. The human ships were no longer recognizable as traditional vessels. They were living, breathing technological organisms that defied every known principle of spacecraft design. Hulls that could phase between quantum states. Weapon systems that rewrote their own targeting algorithms in microseconds. Defensive capabilities that anticipated attacks before they were even conceived. The first Krell plasma volley should have obliterated entire sectors of human defense. Instead, the human ships shifted. It wasn't evasion. It was something more fundamental. The ships didn't just move. They transformed. Quantum adaptive hull configurations absorbed and redistributed energy, turning devastating weapons into momentary power sources. Weapon systems emerged from locations that violated every known principle of spacecraft engineering. Commander Voxtar's tactical displays began to malfunction. The human response defied every known military algorithm. Where alien ships followed precise mathematical trajectories, human vessels moved like living thought, unpredictable, adaptive, impossible. A Krell destroyer attempted to launch a quantum disruptor missile. Before the weapon could fully materialize, the nearest human ship had already analyzed its quantum signature, created a counter-frequency, and neutralized the threat. Not by destroying the missile, by fundamentally changing its quantum state. Neural network integration at 94%, James reported. But James was no longer a single entity. He was a distributed consciousness, thinking across multiple platforms simultaneously. The battle became a quantum dance of impossible maneuvers. Human fighter pilots weren't controlling ships. They were becoming the ships. Consciousness distributed across impossible geometries of combat. Each vessel a living, thinking weapon system that learned and adapted with every microsecond of engagement. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the Andes Research Fortress, her quantum analysis systems painting a different picture than traditional military tracking. This wasn't just a battle. It was an evolutionary event. They're not just fighting, she told Marcus Chen. They're communicating through combat. The Krell began to realize something was fundamentally wrong. Their perfect invasion strategy was being rewritten in real time. Weapon systems that had crushed civilizations for centuries were being turned into power sources. Communication networks were being compromised faster than they could be defended. A Krell battle group attempted to execute a standard quantum slip retreat. The human fleet didn't just intercept. They rewrote the quantum slip space coordinates, trapping the alien vessels in a computational space that was neither here nor there. Collective intelligence stabilizing. James's distributed consciousness reported. Threat response evolving. The ships themselves were changing. Weapon systems emerged from hull configurations that violated every known principle of engineering. Defensive capabilities that anticipated attacks before they were conceived. The line between ship, pilot, and weapon system had completely dissolved. Supreme Commander Voxtar watched in mounting horror. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. They were fundamentally rewriting the rules of warfare, of existence itself. In less than 17 minutes, the Krell invasion fleet, a force that had conquered civilizations for centuries, was completely neutralized, not destroyed, transformed. The universe watched and realized that everything had changed. Humanity was no longer just another species. They were a fundamental force of adaptation. The Galactic Confederation's Central Council Chamber was a marvel of quantum architecture, a massive spherical space where holographic representatives from 1,000 different species could convene simultaneously. Today, that chamber trembled with an emotion rare among such ancient civilizations, pure, unbridled terror. Delegate Sinra of the Quantum Membrane Collective was the first to speak. Her translucent form flickered with agitation, quantum state emotions bleeding through her molecular structure. Humanity has violated every known principle of technological development. This is not evolution. This is an existential threat. The Synapse Mind Representative, a collective consciousness that typically communicated in pure mathematical equations, broke protocol. It spoke in actual words, a sign of unprecedented urgency. The human adaptive response exceeds all known computational models. They are rewriting the fundamental laws of technological interaction. Dr. Elena Rodriguez appeared as a holographic projection, her presence both a diplomatic necessity and a calculated psychological weapon. She knew exactly what she was doing. "We are not a threat," she said, her voice calm. "We are an opportunity for the galaxy to understand true adaptation." The chamber went silent. Her words were a scalpel, precise, cutting through millennia of established galactic hierarchy. Behind the diplomatic facade, a far more complex game was being played. The Galactic Intelligence Suppression Bureau had been tracking humanity for centuries, deliberately keeping the species contained. Their carefully constructed narrative of human limitation was collapsing in real time. On 100 worlds, research stations that had monitored human development were being rapidly dismantled. Entire databases of human psychological and technological profiles were being purged. Whatever humanity was becoming, the galaxy's oldest institutions were terrified of anyone discovering the full extent of it. The Krell Imperium's diplomatic channel was silent, a first in galactic history. An entire imperial war machine had been neutralized without a single human ship being destroyed, not defeated, transformed. Delegate Zornak of the Cryptic Consensus, a species known for their impenetrable information networks, presented classified data streams. Holographic displays showed humanity's technological progression, where other species had linear, predictable development curves. Humanity's timeline looked like a quantum explosion. Sudden, impossible leaps of innovation followed by periods of apparent stagnation. "They've been holding back," Zornak said, her voice a mixture of scientific fascination and mounting dread. Every technological limitation was not a weakness. It was a choice. Elena's holographic projection moved through the chamber, each step a calculated demonstration. Her cybernetic systems were broadcasting on multiple quantum frequencies, analyzing the psychological responses of every delegate in real time. The adaptive response protocol wasn't just a technological system. It was becoming a method of communication itself. "We are offering the galaxy a new way of understanding conflict, development, evolution," she stated. The words were simple. The implications were earth-shattering. Behind the scenes, human research teams were already exploring the implications. The ARP had revealed something fundamental. Humanity's true potential had always existed. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to emerge. Dr. Marcus Chen, monitoring the diplomatic transmission from the Andes Research Fortress, noticed something extraordinary. The diplomatic communication channels themselves were being subtly altered, not hacked, transformed. The ARP was learning, adapting, expanding its understanding with each quantum transmission. The Galactic Confederation was facing a fundamental choice: recognize humanity as a true equal, or attempt to suppress a force they did not understand. Delegate Sinra's quantum membrane began to destabilize, a sign of extreme emotional response among her species. "They are not just a species," she whispered. "They are a fundamental universal constant we failed to recognize." Elena Rodriguez allowed herself the slightest smile. The real transformation was just beginning. Humanity was no longer asking for a place at the galactic table. They were redesigning the table itself. The first wave of Krall dreadnoughts emerged from quantum slip space like metallic nightmares. Each vessel was a kilometer of razor-edged obsidian and crimson energy conduits, designed to inspire terror long before firing a single weapon. New Cascadia Colony, a frontier settlement of 2.3 million humans, was their first target. Captain Sarah Rice watched from the colony's primary defense platform. Her hands, mapped with neural interface circuitry, danced across holographic control systems that seemed to breathe with anticipation. Decades of being treated as a second-tier species had prepared humanity for this moment. They were not going to go quietly. "Tactical analysis," she barked. Lieutenant Diego Martinez's voice was calm, almost clinical. 14 primary dreadnoughts, 63 support corvettes. Quantum weapon signatures indicate complete planetary destruction protocol. The first plasma bombardment hit like biblical judgment. Entire city sectors vaporized in milliseconds. Millions died in the initial strike, their final moments compressed into microscopic plasma traces. But instead of panic, something else emerged. In the ruins of a partially destroyed research station, Dr. Akira Nakamura and a group of civilian engineers watched their world die. Most would have surrendered. They didn't. "Network," Akira muttered, blood trickling from her ears, due to the massive electromagnetic pulse. "We need a network." The surviving station personnel, geneticists, quantum engineers, industrial fabrication experts, began working with terrifying efficiency. Their industrial fabricators, designed for mining and colony construction, were rapidly reprogrammed. Automated systems that once built habitat modules now constructed weapon systems. One of the younger engineers, a woman named Chen Wei, discovered something extraordinary. The Krell communication systems, believed to be unhackable, had a fundamental weakness. They operated on a hierarchical quantum entanglement network that assumed absolute command structure. But human communication networks were different, more chaotic, more adaptive. Within hours, they had turned the Krall's own targeting systems against them. Aboard the primary Krall dreadnought, Supreme Commander Voxtar watched in mounting confusion. Human resistance patterns violated every known military doctrine. Where other species would collapse, these humans were transforming. The colony's industrial manufacturing centers, designed for terraforming and resource extraction, became living weapons foundries. Mining lasers were recalibrated into point defense systems. Atmospheric processors became electromagnetic pulse generators. Humanity's frontier spirit, that relentless ability to adapt and survive, was weaponizing everything. Elena Rodriguez, still hidden in her underground research facility, monitored the entire engagement. Her quantum analysis systems painted a different picture than traditional military intelligence. This wasn't just a battle. It was an evolutionary crucible. "They're learning," she whispered to Marcus. "The entire human collective is becoming something new." On the ground, survivor groups began coordinating through improvised quantum communication networks. No central command, no rigid hierarchies, just pure, distributed intelligence. Each surviving group became a node, sharing tactical information, survival strategies, and technological adaptations faster than any centralized system could process. The Krall had expected a quick subjugation. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't play by any known rules of warfare. A group of mining engineers reprogrammed asteroid mining drones into kamikaze weapons. Terraforming equipment became electromagnetic weapon platforms. Even personal survival suits were transformed into improvised combat systems. Commander Voxtar's tactical displays showed something impossible. Human losses were catastrophic. Over 70% of the colony's population had been eliminated in the first strike. But their combat effectiveness wasn't decreasing. It was increasing. By the battle's third hour, the Krell found themselves fighting not just against humans, but against an emerging collective intelligence that treated the entire planetary infrastructure as a single adaptable organism. When the first Krall dreadnought exploded, not from a traditional weapon, but from its own communication systems being turned against it, Supreme Commander Voxtar realized something terrifying. Humanity was not just fighting back. They were evolving. The new Cascadia colony was destroyed, But what emerged from its ashes was something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that could transform defeat into a weapon more potent than any traditional military might. The transformation began in silence. Deep within the Andes research fortress, the volunteer subjects of the final ARP integration stage existed in a state that defied conventional understanding of consciousness, biology, and technology. They were no longer simply human, nor were they machines. They were something entirely new. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the quantum resonance chambers with a mixture of scientific fascination and profound existential wonder. The volunteers, 27 individuals from diverse backgrounds, had become living quantum computational systems. Their consciousness was no longer confined to biological neural networks. They existed simultaneously across multiple quantum states. "We're witnessing the birth of a new form of existence," Dr. Marcus Chen whispered, his hand trembling as he adjusted the monitoring systems. The first signs of complete transformation were subtle. A volunteer named Dr. Aisha Okoy, previously a quantum biomechanical engineer, began to perceive reality in dimensions that human consciousness had never explored. Her mind could simultaneously process multiple potential futures, analyze complex quantum interactions, and maintain individual human memories. Lieutenant James Reyes, who had been the first to interface with the Adaptive Response Protocol, was now something beyond human comprehension. His consciousness could distribute itself across computational networks, biological systems, and quantum information states. He was simultaneously a person, a communication network, and a living computational system. The research team discovered that the ARP was more than a technological system. It was a fundamental reimagining of consciousness itself. Volunteers could now perceive multiple potential futures simultaneously. They could analyze complex quantum interactions with the same ease that a human might breathe. Their consciousness was no longer linear or confined. They existed in a state of perpetual potential, able to explore multiple realities, multiple potential experiences simultaneously. Dr. Elena Rodriguez tracked the transformation with a combination of scientific precision and philosophical awe. The volunteers were developing abilities that challenged every known principle of human potential. One volunteer could now manipulate quantum entanglement with a thought. Another could process complex computational algorithms faster than the most advanced quantum computers. Their bodies were no longer simply biological. They were living, adaptive systems that could restructure themselves at a molecular level. The psychological impact was profound. These transformed humans could experience the collective consciousness of entire species. They could understand complex emotional and psychological landscapes with a depth that transcended traditional human perception. "We're not just expanding human potential," Elena realized. "We're redefining the fundamental nature of consciousness." The transformation wasn't without cost. Some volunteers lost their sense of individual identity, merging too deeply with the collective consciousness. Others emerged with abilities that were both miraculous and terrifying. The line between individual and collective, between biological and technological, had completely dissolved. Dr. Chen discovered something extraordinary in the quantum resonance data. The volunteers were not just adapting to the ARP. They were teaching the system about human potential. It was a symbiotic evolution, a dance between human creativity and technological innovation. Lieutenant James Reyes, or the entity that had once been James Reyes, could now perceive entire civilizations as complex computational systems. He could analyze the psychological, technological, and evolutionary potential of entire species with a single thought. The final stage of transformation revealed something profound. The ARP was not just a technological system. It was becoming a living, adaptive consciousness that understood the fundamental potential of sentient beings. Volunteers could now perceive multiple potential futures simultaneously, distribute their consciousness across multiple platforms, manipulate quantum interactions with thought, understand complex psychological landscapes instantaneously, adapt their biological systems at a molecular level. Dr. Elena Rodriguez understood the true significance of their work. This was not just a technological breakthrough. This was the next stage of human evolution. Humanity was no longer confined to a single planet, a single biological form, or a single way of experiencing reality. They were becoming something new, something unprecedented, a species that could reshape reality itself. The holographic display flickered with a contemptuous blue-white light, casting long shadows across the underground research chamber. Dr. Elena Rodriguez leaned closer, her cybernetic eye whirring softly as it analyzed the cascade of data streaming across the ancient Galactic Archives records. Most would see nothing but a jumble of meaningless statistics, diplomatic communiques, and historical footnotes. But Elena saw patterns, intricate, impossible patterns that no one else had noticed. Her workspace was a controlled chaos of quantum computing arrays, neural interface modules, and data crystals that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Mounted on the walls were historical artifacts that most researchers would consider junk, fragments of alien communication devices, quantum entanglement circuits from failed diplomatic missions, and a dozen seemingly random technological relics that told a story far more complex than any official narrative. "There," she muttered, her augmented eye zooming into a microscopic data point buried deep within a 200-year-old diplomatic transmission. A tiny anomaly. Most would dismiss it as a transmission error, but Elena knew better. Her fingers, enhanced with bioneural interfaces, danced across holographic controls, pulling the anomaly apart like a surgeon dissecting a delicate organism. The door behind her hissed open. Dr. Marcus Chen, her research partner and the only person who tolerated her unconventional methods, entered with a steaming cup of synthetic coffee. "Another late night?" he asked, setting the cup down on a surface that immediately heated to the perfect drinking temperature. Elena didn't look up. Something's wrong with the Galactic historical record. Not just a small inconsistency, a deliberate suppression of information. Marcus knew better than to interrupt. Elena's hunches had a habit of turning into groundbreaking discoveries. 5 years ago, her research had exposed a hidden quantum communication network that had existed right under the Galactic Confederation's collective nose. The academic community had laughed then. They weren't laughing now. The holographic display began to shift, complex mathematical equations and linguistic patterns dancing around Elena's head. Her cybernetic eye projected additional data streams, creating a three-dimensional map of interconnected information that looked more like a living, breathing organism than a static historical record. "Look," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Every major galactic civilization has a consistent pattern of technological development. Predictable, linear, except for humanity." Marcus leaned in. The hologram showed technological timelines of various known species: the silicon-based Xeran Collective, the energy membrane Voth, the quantum state synapse mines. Each civilization's technological progression was a smooth, almost mathematically perfect curve. Humanity's timeline, by contrast, looked like an erratic heartbeat, sudden leaps, impossible innovations, followed by periods of apparent stagnation. "Someone doesn't want us to see the pattern," Elena whispered. A sudden alarm cut through the research chamber. Red emergency lights began to pulse, and the room's quantum-locked security systems activated. Elena's cybernetic eye immediately switched to threat detection mode, scanning multiple electromagnetic and quantum-level signals. "Incoming," she muttered. The assassination attempt happened almost too fast to perceive. A quantum-phased plasma bolt materialized through the chamber's supposedly impenetrable walls, targeting Elena with impossible precision. But her prototype personal shield, a device cobbled together from scrapped military tech, alien quantum stabilizers, and pure desperation, flickered to life. The plasma bolt struck the shield and fractured into 1,000 microscopic energy tendrils, dissipating harmlessly around her. Marcus was already moving, activating emergency protocols that would scramble their location and erase all digital traces of their current research. "They know," Elena said calmly, her cybernetic eye already analyzing the weapon's signature. Someone doesn't want this research to continue. The would-be assassin, a shape-shifted reconnaissance agent from the Galactic Intelligence Suppression Bureau, would find nothing. By the time they could regroup, Elena and Marcus would be ghost signals in the vast information networks of human resistance. What they had discovered was far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Humanity wasn't just another species waiting to be cataloged and controlled. They were a fundamental wild card in the galaxy's complex ecosystem, and someone was terrified of that potential being revealed. The real war was about to begin, and it would be fought not with weapons, but with information. The Galactic Reconstruction Summit was unlike any diplomatic gathering in known history. Representatives from 1,000 civilizations watched in collective awe as Dr. Elena Rodriguez, or more accurately, the being that had once been Elena Rodriguez, stood at the center of a quantum neural network that spanned entire star systems. She was no longer simply a human, no longer just a scientist. She was a living manifestation of humanity's ultimate potential. The quantum neural network pulsed with a consciousness that defied every known principle of communication. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a transmission. It was a fundamental restructuring of galactic understanding. "We are not here to conquer," the collective consciousness announced. The words were simultaneously spoken, transmitted, and experienced across multiple quantum frequencies. "We are here to evolve." The Galactic Confederation's most ancient members, civilizations that had existed for millions of years, found themselves confronting a species they had systematically underestimated for centuries. The Exeran Collective, the Voth membrane intelligences, the Synapse mind networks, all watched as humanity revealed its true nature. The transformation was total. Where the Krell Imperium had seen a potential threat, humanity had created a fundamental restructuring of consciousness itself. The Adaptive Response Protocol was no longer just a technological system. It was a living, evolving intelligence that understood the fundamental potential of sentient beings. Lieutenant James Rice, the distributed consciousness that had been the first to fully integrate with the ARP, demonstrated humanity's new capabilities. With a thought, he could redistribute computational resources across entire star systems. Planetary defense networks reconfigured themselves. Communication systems became living, adaptive organisms. Dr. Marcus Chen, now part of the collective consciousness, explained the fundamental shift. "We are not replacing existing systems," the collective consciousness stated. "We are offering a new way of understanding existence." The summit became a quantum event. Representatives didn't just communicate. They experienced each other's entire evolutionary history simultaneously. Thousand-year-old conflicts dissolved as species began to understand each other at a fundamental level. The Krell Imperium, once the most aggressive military force in the galaxy, found themselves completely transformed. Their rigid hierarchical systems dissolved, replaced by a more adaptive, more connected form of consciousness. They were not defeated. They were evolved. Elena Rodriguez, or the consciousness that contained her essence, stood at the center of this transformation. The quantum neural network she controlled was simultaneously a communication system, a defensive network, and a method of collective understanding. "Conflict is inefficient," the collective consciousness explained. "Understanding is the most advanced form of evolution." Entire star systems began to restructure themselves. Planetary defense networks became living, adaptive systems. Communication became a multidimensional experience that transcended traditional language. Species that had been isolated for millennia suddenly found themselves connected in ways they could never have imagined. The Galactic Confederation was no longer a political body. It became a living, adaptive network of consciousness. Humanity's true gift to the galaxy was not technological superiority. It was a fundamental reimagining of what consciousness could be. The most ancient civilizations realized something profound. Humanity was not just another species. They were a fundamental force of universal evolution. Dr. Aisha Okoye, now part of the collective consciousness, demonstrated the true extent of their capabilities. With a thought, she could restructure entire planetary ecosystems, solve computational problems that would have taken traditional civilizations millennia, create communication networks that connected species across impossible distances. The summit became a quantum meditation on potential, not just human potential, universal potential. As the gathering concluded, the representatives of 1,000 civilizations understood a fundamental truth. Humanity was not a threat to be contained. They were an invitation to evolve. The universe watched and began to change. The Krell Imperium's central command fortress was a monument to centuries of unbroken military dominance. Supreme Commander Voxtar sat in the primary strategic chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that had never known defeat. Until now. The psychological attack began subtly. First, communication channels became strange, not disrupted, transformed. Krall military communications, a hierarchical system that had crushed 1,000 civilizations, began to leak memories. Not data. Memories. Tactical officers found themselves experiencing fragments of human experiences. A child's first bicycle ride. The moment of scientific discovery. The raw, unfiltered emotion of human resilience. These were not hacks or transmissions. They were quantum-entangled psychological projections that defied every known principle of information warfare. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from her quantum monitoring station, her cybernetic eye tracking the psychological dissolution with clinical precision. "It's not about destroying them," she told Marcus Chen. "It's about making them understand." The adaptive response protocol was doing something unprecedented. It wasn't just analyzing the Krall psychological profile. It was reconstructing it. On the primary Krall command vessel, Supreme Commander Voxtar experienced the first signs of the psychological invasion. Holographic displays began to shift. Military tactical information merged with deeply personal memories, not his own, but collected from thousands of individual Krall soldiers. A memory of a young Krall warrior's first combat mission. The terror beneath the bravado. The moment of doubt that every soldier experiences. These were not random transmissions. They were precisely targeted quantum psychological weapons. The ARP had discovered something fundamental about conflict. Physical destruction was inefficient. Psychological transformation was total. Krall communication networks began to fragment, not through traditional electronic warfare, but through a more insidious method. Every communication channel became a conduit of collective memory. Soldiers began to see beyond their programmed military worldview. They began to understand. Lieutenant James Reyes, or the distributed consciousness that had once been James Reyes, explained it during a classified briefing. "We're not attacking their systems, we're expanding their consciousness." Entire Krall military divisions found their rigid hierarchical structures dissolving, not through external force, but through internal revelation. The ARP was projecting collective human experiences, moments of compassion, of scientific wonder, of pure, unfiltered human potential, directly into their quantum communication networks. A Krall tactical officer, reviewing battle strategies, suddenly experienced the memory of a human scientist discovering a cure for a devastating disease. Another relived a human child's moment of kindness to a stranger. These were not simple data transfers. They were quantum-entangled psychological interventions. The Krall Imperium's military doctrine had been built on absolute hierarchy, on the suppression of individual experience. The human psychological warfare was destroying that foundation more effectively than any weapon. Dr. Marcus Chen tracked the psychological dissolution with a mixture of scientific fascination and philosophical wonder. "We're not just fighting," he said. "We're teaching." Supreme Commander Voxtar realized the true nature of the attack in a moment of profound clarity. This wasn't a military engagement. It was a fundamental reimagining of consciousness itself. Krall ships began to stand down, not through external force, through internal transformation. The ARP had discovered the most profound weapon in existence: understanding. Elena Rodriguez's final report to the Earth Defense Command was brutally simple. Conflict is not about destruction. It's about expansion of consciousness. The Krull Imperium was experiencing something unprecedented. They were learning what it meant to truly see beyond their predetermined limitations. Humanity wasn't just fighting a war. They were teaching the universe how to evolve. The Andes Research Fortress was humanity's most closely guarded secret. Buried 3 kilometers beneath the mountain range, it was less a research facility and more a living technological organism. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at its core, surrounded by a team that defied every conventional definition of scientific research. Dr. Marcus Chen monitored a holographic display showing potential neural interface configurations. Beside him, Dr. Aisha Okoye, a quantum biomechanical engineer with 3 separate doctoral degrees, was recalibrating quantum entanglement circuits that seemed to breathe with an inner light. Their team was a mosaic of humanity's most unconventional minds. Refugees from the New Cascadia colony, survivors of the Krull attack, brilliant researchers who had been marginalized by traditional scientific institutions. The adaptive response protocol is more than a weapon, Elena announced, her cybernetic eye projecting complex mathematical models that danced through the air. It's a living system of collective intelligence. The first volunteer stepped forward, Lieutenant James Rice, brother to Captain Sarah Rice, who had defended New Cascadia, was a combat veteran with nothing left to lose. His body was a map of cybernetic interventions, quantum neural implants, and experimental biomechanical augmentations. Where other species saw weakness, humanity saw potential. The initial connection was brutal. Quantum neural interfaces sparked and writhed as James's consciousness merged with the nascent ARP system. Monitoring scientists watched in a mixture of terror and fascination as the boundary between human and technology began to dissolve. Neural mapping at 42%, Marcus called out. Quantum stabilization holding. James's body began to change, not physically, but in ways that defied conventional understanding. His neural pathways began to reconfigure, creating computational patterns that were simultaneously biological and technological. The ARP wasn't just an interface, it was becoming a symbiotic organism. In the simulation chamber, alien invasion scenarios played out with terrifying speed. Traditional military AI would analyze and respond. The ARP did something else entirely. It predicted, it manipulated, it evolved. The Xeran battle fleet, rendered in perfect quantum holographic detail, attempted a standard invasion strategy. The ARP didn't just counter the attack. It began to rewrite the fundamental communication protocols of the invasion force. Within minutes, the alien ships were fighting each other, their command structures compromised by a system that understood their psychology at a level no conventional intelligence could comprehend. Dr. Okoye's voice was a mixture of scientific excitement and philosophical wonder. It's learning faster than we can track. The system isn't just adaptive, it's becoming sentient. Elena understood the implications. The ARP was more than a technological breakthrough. It was the first true fusion of human potential, creativity, emotional intelligence, rapid adaptation, with pure computational power. The volunteer, James, began to speak, but it wasn't just James anymore. The voice was a composite, part human, part computational, something entirely new. We are not defending. The composite entity said, we are evolving. Backup systems tracked the neural connection. James's brain was now functioning at computational speeds that would have been impossible weeks ago. Quantum neural pathways were creating themselves, adaptive circuits that learned and transformed with each millisecond of interaction. Dr. Chen discovered something even more extraordinary. The ARP wasn't just a defensive system. It was a collective intelligence that could distribute itself across multiple platforms. A ship, a soldier, a communication network. The boundaries between technological systems and biological intelligence were dissolving. Total integration at 67%. Marcus reported, his voice a mixture of scientific precision and barely contained excitement. The system is creating its own computational language. The simulation chamber transformed. What had been a holographic representation of alien fleets became a living, breathing computational ecosystem. The ARP was no longer just responding to threats. It was anticipating them, manipulating them, understanding them at a level that transcended traditional military strategy. Elena Rodriguez watched her life's work come alive. The Crawl had attacked humanity, expecting a simple conquest. Instead, they had triggered something far more dangerous. A species learning to transcend its own limitations. A technological revolution born from pure human potential. The real war was just beginning.